Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for this invite. It's great to be back on the WFA webinars, and particularly in this Remembrance Month of November, and particularly, of course, now the 100th anniversary year of the unveiling of the permanent cenotaph and the burial of the unknown warrior. And, because often I think we don't think about joining up these chronologies, we are, of course, 100 years and 2 months on from the opening of the first of the experimental cemeteries, which the Commission completed on the Western Front. And I'll get round to that during the course of the talk. So if we begin at the beginning, obviously during the war, men are burying their fellows. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, what happens fairly early on is that great polymath of the British Empire, sort of the Renaissance prince in his own way, Fabian Ware, has joined the Red Cross mobile unit and very quickly gets involved in grave registration and hunting for graves. And then during 1915, his operation is gradually, slowly merged into the army to establish the Directorate of Graves Registration and Inquiries. But it still works very, very closely with the Red Cross, and in particular, the Red Cross funds a photographic unit to photograph the graves so they can send back, these very powerful little precious mementos to the next of kin. So you have a DGRE that's established, the Directorate of Graves Registration and Inquiries. But obviously, as I'm sure you all know from your own reading, your many visits to the Western Front, you've seen it. Men bury their comrades as well. Units bury their dead. And you also have, by 1916 into 17, the growth of a corps burial scheme as well. At corps level, there is an officer who liaises with the DGRE about the burying of soldiers and the marking of their graves. You can see here from a photograph like this one how important that sense of the decent burial, where possible, every effort made to give their comrades a decent burial, to send them off, and to remember their military endeavours as well. And I think that's going to be crucial to the IWGC. That there are really two factors going on here: to mark individual graves, to commemorate, eventually it'll be to commemorate the missing as well, but also very much to see them in terms of soldiers. And you get things like this happening as well. So this is the 1st Australian Division Memorial being unveiled by General Birdwood at Ploegsteert. You can see the military cemetery there on the 8th of July 1917. So we can, again, what's great about a photograph like that is showing the desire of soldiers to remember their dead, to salute their dead, and also at the same time to mark their military exploits. We did something great here. We did something important that is helping to win the war here. So those two strands are together the whole time. Just as you'll see here, a lot of you, I'm sure, have been to this site. There's the Canadian Artillery Memorial at Thelus, and you can see nicely bunkered in there. So this desire to put up memorials is prominent throughout the forces. So they're not only marking their dead, they're also building memorials which commemorate general actions by particular units, their contributions to great battles and great victories. Now, we've got guys here, the GRU, Graves Registration Unit. That's the number 3 section in Ypres. You can see them showing off their nice little badge behind them there. Notice the array of cap badges that are being worn there. Often guys on GRU activities are either slightly older men, maybe have been invalided out of frontline service, and they're involved in what must have been an extremely harrowing, at times very gruesome activity of burial and identification of remains. On the Somme front in 1917, when the army moves forward, in the wake of the Great German retreat, then, of course, it's a kind of immense operation across that Somme front by the GRU. They're collecting in all the scraps of information and evidence they've got. They're trying to find the scattered graves. They're trying to mark them. And in some ways, nature, in fact, will hamper their task on the Somme in that spring of 17, because once it breaks through, once that appalling weather finally turns, then, as I'm sure a lot of you know through reading your William Orpen Onlooker in France and such like, the Somme goes into a riotous spring and summer, which meant very thick, tall grass in many places. So that, the sheer navigating their way around this landscape to try and find graves was an immense task, because places the bushes, brambles, grass is thigh high, and so they're scrabbling around looking for what remnants they can in order to mark them on their maps and mark out the small little cemeteries that had been created. Obviously, as you can all imagine, where the GRU can really do its work more extensively are in the cemeteries behind the lines, in the hospital encampment, the great base hospital. They're far away from gunfire. They can really get their act into gear. It's there where Arthur Hill, from the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, is sent out. He's making his very earliest appreciations of horticultural treatment. You have the great William Cowlishaw, who's going to become an architect for the commission, working for the Red Cross unit, advising about the architecture of graves, in this case, kind of temporary architecture of cemeteries, of decently fencing them in, of creating walkways between them, because it's equally clear, that soldiers behind the lines, they want to see, as we've been saying, they want to see their comrades well remembered, respectfully remembered. They bring tribute. They often make tributes as well. We'll be making their own grave markers, often putting on their own peculiar insignia and markers of their units. Some of you might have seen the glorious West Lancashire Division enamel disc that they would put on all of their graves. What was it? He who wears the red rose of Lancaster doesn't know death or victory, or something. Is on that enamel disc, and that is there kind of things like that are clearly built in the divisional workshops and then sent out for their memorials. But as I was saying, behind the lines, you can do things more extensively. Here, that very important symbolism, a deliberately staged photograph that the WAAC, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, are brought in to relieve the labour supply problem by having women tending graves. And that is an absolutely crucial propaganda symbol. It's a crucial spiritual symbol, isn't it? That's very anthropological, really, in its circularity. If women are the nurturers of life, women carry life, they give birth to men boys who then become men who are prepared to put down their lives in order that civilization can continue, in order to defend the sanctity of home. Then having women who actually come in, at the other end of the cycle of life, are actually there to play a part in the decent, respectful remembrance of men, brings a beautiful circularity. And of course, it's also part of that chain of being, as it were, for women in the Great War who are on the war fronts. Women as mothers on the home front, women as carers and nurturers, surrogate mothers as nurses, and then women as carers of the final spot of remembrance. Very important, subtle little message coming through in wartime propaganda. At the end of the war, you obviously have to start exploring the battlefields. So as soon as the war ends, the GRU has its task expanded massively. The armies have well advanced. They've got to work hand in glove with the salvage and clear up work to try and start finding graves. Again, every scrap of information and evidence is being checked as they try and bring in the scattered graves to start concentrating them into the cemeteries that are going to be kept. The task they're given, is entirely thankless in some ways. I mean, it must have been absolutely hideous that they're told to look for particularly lush belts of grass, because literally anywhere that's looking particularly lush, are suppurating bodies. They're fertilizing the ground. Anywhere where there are particularly thick belts of wildflowers, again, likely to be bodies, literally fertilizing the soil there. And perhaps more disturbingly, anywhere where there's very obvious evidence of rat activity. So if there are a lot of rat holes, start digging there. What they're given as really sort of their sounding rods and their measuring rods, most of them are using Vickers machine guns, cleaning rods, and you bang that down into the soil, almost like the way an archaeologist sees if they're going to bounce off something, if they get a bit of vibration from it. And as you can see, everything is then, whatever remains are found, put on a soaked creosote sheet. The team have gloves. What you can see, most of these guys don't leave too much personal testimony behind, but there's enough to suggest, that in fact that their dream in many ways is just to find skeletons. What you don't want to find are bits of a corpse. You pull on the shoulders and the bottom gives way. Often then the stench that is relieved. I mean, how they ever got that smell out of their noses, I don't know. It must have been immensely physically and emotionally harrowing work. A lot of them are camped out all week on the battlefield. It's particularly grim, again, on that massive Somme battlefield. The width of that battlefield, the length of it is remarkable. They go out on a Monday morning. They're coming back on a Friday night with their camping equipment, and everything else and their records. And it really is no wonder, they go into towns like Amiens and pretty much get wasted. I mean, if you think they're out on this absolute wasteland, and then they, I think I trying to obliterate this. So it's harrowing, hard work, and they're doing a lot of it because they overlap so much with the salvage operation. They're also doing it a lot. There'll be a lot of Chinese labourers involved, a lot of the still Indian Labour Corps units involved. And until the treaty is signed, until the Peace of Paris is signed, German prisoners of war are also put to work on doing some of this stuff. Now, what's the GRU? What's the wider scenario that's operating in? Well, those of you watching the who came along for the talk about Ypres, will know, it's like this. So this is a world in which local people are coming back, and they're living cheek by jowl with the salvation, the salvage operation, and the finding of bodies. And again, that sort of weird sense in which there are going to be young kids, young impressionable children watching this weird, the very best weird processes going on around them. So what a crazy world that must have been. There's down on the Somme. There's Beaumont-Hamel getting itself back to some kind of normal existence. And as I say, there's a lot of children hanging around near the school hut there. And here, there's Messines. Notice the graves visitors in the foreground there who've just dismounted from the car, who battlefield visitors either come to see cemeteries, or just have a snoop round the battlefields. That's on the corner of the main square in Messines. There's a great industrial city like Lens. As it says, the main on the Bethune Road, the baraquement there, the barracks, the huts in which people lived. So we have our local people living, coming back, rebuilding their lives, as the army is trying to clear up, as the GRU is trying to concentrate graves, find as many as they can. And again, you can see, I used this last time, just what dangerous work it is. Because let's face it, you know, some of those GRU guys are going to be searching for bodies around stuff like this, you know, unexploded ammunition. It is not easy work. This is what, you know, some of the cemeteries look like at the end of the war. The cemeteries that have been in the fighting zone, so those, you know, that are frontline cemeteries or immediately behind it, where the lines have advanced and come and gone. This is the effect it has. I'm sure a lot of you have been to Maple Copse Cemetery. You know it's built very deliberately on its little island in the bog there. I mean, look at that. That is a marsh, isn't it? It is a quite remarkable sight, you know, and obviously GRU teams are going to have to come in there, look at the original records they have, and try to work out, you know, what has happened, often with grave markers, you know, blown here, there, and everywhere. Sometimes, you know, a soldier has come past, not like the thought of a grave marker being on its side and has driven it into the soil, which then might create the sense that there is a body underneath it, but, you know, actually it's been blown from 50 foot down the road, and so it means digging, it means verification that's got to go on, you know, and again, a very much a posed photograph to show the processes of the GRU for the historical record there, and notice the way the officer in charge with his sergeant there, you know, they're busy looking at their records. Very important that to give the reassurance, you know, that every process is properly carried out, and everyone is determined to make sure that they can remove remains respectfully and, of course, crucially try to identify them as well. It means backbreaking work as well. Here's Hooge Crater. You can see at the top, like the little shed there at Hooge Crater Cemetery. That's the on-site morgue where they're bringing a lot of the bodies into to carry on identification processes. Now, this is actually where, you know, where the GRU, where we meet the crossroad point, the nodal point with the IWGC. As I'm sure a lot of you know, it's in the Imperial War Conference of the spring of 1917. One of the agreements there is that there should be a permanent pan-imperial body to commemorate the losses of the empire in perpetuity. You know, a quite unique imperial institution, genuinely pan-imperial. Obviously, when I say genuinely pan-imperial, representatives of every part of the empire, but in most instances, that's going to be white men. They want they're going to try in their own way to get the voice of the empire in there, but the conduits for all of this are white men who are going to be making the decisions. And so the plan is, and Ware moves over to being head of the IWGC, sort of really leaves his DGRE job behind to a certain extent to start thinking about the permanent commemoration. And the plan is that once the army has ended its work on the Western Front, so September 1921, the GRU will then hand on all of its records to the IWGC. And then it's going to be the IWGC's job from the moment it inherits the entire kind of catalogue of records of the GRU, begin the permanent commemorative work. But in truth, you know, the two organisations, of course, are working cheek by jowl. They share a lot of personnel. Indeed, they share offices, which makes a lot of sense, you know, because the personnel can then do a lot of verification and check things very easily amongst themselves. So the IWGC is going to get on with the permanent work, having taken on the information that it's been fed by the DGRU. But I said that they're very much organisations that work hand in glove with each other. Now, what's remarkable about all of this, of course, is that something massive has happened in British and imperial society, right? Remember, Britain in 1914, indeed, really, the whole wider empire, certainly the white dominions, are liberal with a small l democracies. There is a belief in the rights of the individual, the primacy of individual rights. You know, it's what we would now think of today as government should be small. It's not an intrusive government. The war forces it, of course, to sink its claws into everyone's life. But the idea that the state could, in perpetuity, hold on to the bodies of dead men is remarkable. Us at our end of the telescope, we don't tend to think about it so much. Do you think of it from their position? The last thing that is left to a bereaved family, the most precious remnant of that life is the body. And the state is saying, no, you will not have that body back. Now, in some ways, Ware is going to get more support for this plan from the further parts of the empire. Australia and New Zealand buy into this really quite quickly. Why? Well, first of all, there is the problem of Gallipoli for them, isn't there? Graves that are still behind in their own, we're still behind enemy lines. Obviously the empire has long since given up on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Will it ever get back in there? What will it find? It's a non-Christian country. It's a Muslim country. What's it going to be like? So an agency that steps in and says to people, you leave all that to us. We'll sort it all out. And we will make decisions. I think there's also then a fair degree of, shall we say, straight kind of clear thinking in places like Australia and New Zealand. If you ever can find all these bodies, are you really going to be able to bring them home? Is there enough refrigerated shipping, in the entire empire to safely bring back bodies for fear, and not have disease and everything else? Can you bring them through something like the roaring heat of the Red Sea in high summer to get them home? So, I think there's a real sense from Australia and New Zealand, you can leave it to a pan-imperial body that's committed itself to the highest standards of commemoration. A little bit more dissent in Canada, because obviously it's got its neighbour over the parallel that's openly committed itself to repatriation of bodies. In some ways, though, the biggest problem for Ware and the Commission in the early days is going to be here. It's going to be right on their doorstep. It's going to be in Britain. And the people that in fact lead the cry most are not so much the poorer members of society. You might expect it from the poor, because remember, they've all come out of a Victorian world of commemoration, in which the idea of being buried by the state, that is synonymous with a pauper's grave. Only workhouse people die and get buried by an authority. That explains, the obsession with things like cooperative bank funeral insurances in the late 19th century. The idea of the decent send-off is everything. Only the very, very greatest and the sort of very lowest get the state or some form of state agency, to cover their death. You're either the Duke of Wellington at one end, or you're the poor person in the workhouse at the other. But it's not, in fact, so much the poorer people of Britain that lead the cry. It is the richer, those with the means to ensure repatriation. They want to know what's going on. And here we have the great Lady Maud Selborne, writing in the National Review. Just look at the rhetoric, it's amazing. But this comradeship, to be sacred, must be voluntary. There is no beauty in compelling a poor widow who does not take the same view as the majority of the nation to leave her husband's body in the state cemetery. This conscription of bodies is worthy of Lenin. For liberty could harm no one. It was urged that individual monuments in the cemeteries would spoil the appearance of the whole, but the removal of the bodies of those whose relations disliked the state graveyards would spoil no view. So there we go. Look, this contempt of liberty, this exaltation of the state, this aspiration for similarity and equality is the very quintessence of socialism. Lady Maud Selborne giving it, because the irony is that she's condemning really an arch patriarchal old-fashioned Tory in Fabian Ware. And one of the reasons why Ware and the Commission in their earliest days, and he'd actually, long before the Commission is born, he's thinking about this, in a war which is said to be in defense of common values, of common understandings of civilization, where all, regardless of their background, are being asked to contribute and to sacrifice great things, you cannot then have inequality in the way the dead are marked. Even more so, you can't do it in a multiracial, multi-faith empire. You can't have this. So in fact, it's in 1915, that where long before the commission is born, he gets the army to agree to a no repatriation policy. He gets involved in making deals with the French and then the Belgian government that nothing should happen to soldiers' graves without the agreement of the British state. So in other words, if a mum, dad shows up and says, we want this body dug up, the actual, official legal position is there is no basis on which it can be done, because it is once the British state has made up its mind. If it makes up its mind for repatriation, fine, but nothing can happen as far as the French and Belgians are concerned, until there is the signal from the state. And Ware sticks with that, all the way through. This becomes the cornerstone. I say, so it's linked with those spiritual ideas of the war, and of course has that, as I was saying, kind of, about the Gallipoli example, the very practical issue of can you repatriate people all across the globe? And so the two come together. In May 1920, there is the great debate in the House of Commons in which Churchill and Burdett Coutts defend the position of the Commission of common grave markers, a common architectural policy, and no repatriation. And they win that, and that really gives Ware, the mandate he needs to get on with the job. Hence the real rush to get 3 experimental cemeteries done by the autumn, so he can get people out there to see them. He wants them to see stone. He wants them to see these gardens of stone, these cities of the imperial dead, so they can see just how apt the approach has been. So what are things like? So ideally they're like this. This is how the GRU wants to hand over every cemetery to the IWGC, and that's the way they want to see it. Nicely marked out plots. You can see nice little plank walkways there, so visitors can get around them. Everything nicely labelled. You can see the plot numbers and letters there, and a nice burial plan, so they can then begin planning the final, architectural treatments for these spaces. Here at Kemmel Chateau Cemetery, you can see what tended to happen in that kind of early crossover period was that often whole new rafts of grave markers. Again, they're going to be temporary, but whole new rafts are put in just to clarify things. It's often where they've clarified the record, so you put up a new grave marker, and they're often laid out like this, and then will be put upright, will be driven into the soil. There's Blighty Valley down on the Somme. Now, obviously, what the Commission's got to do is get its architect into gear to begin planning the final, and of course, the horticultural teams. But in the meantime, there is the idea that whilst the cemeteries are awaiting their transformation, I was saying that they should look as good as possible. And a big, relatively cheap, if labour intensive, win that they can get for that is to make sure that horticulturally they look nice. So the maintenance teams are ensuring that the fencing's good, and obviously as grazing animals are coming back, you want to make sure they can't get in. So all of those to fence them off nicely, but then they can look good at certain times of the year. So you have travelling gardening parties. They go out. Very much like the original GRU parties, moving around, camping out on the battlefields, moving from cemetery to cemetery, doing their horticultural work, long before a headstone has arrived or anything like the permanent features. And these guys must have had a rare old time, really. There's the gardening staff, La Punoir, that you can see there. You know, pretty much all of these, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, are going to be ex-servicemen, veterans who have joined the commission. Excuse me, often having drifted through the ranks of the GRU as well. Now, what's life like in these early days? Well, fortunately, we have some of these wonderful accounts. So here's the great Colonel Reginald Haworth, who was the chief accountant, and it tells you something about the conditions in France in the early days. So the cash amounts for wages were made up in the wage packets on a Thursday and Friday to the branch offices by car. This had its risks. The drivers were instructed to vary their routes, and a man with a rifle went with them. This is these early, you know, post-war days when it's like the Wild West out there, when there are all those fears that the trenches are going to be filled with bandits who have come out of the sewers of Paris, you know, to run amok. So this idea, you know, that lone small groups running around are going to be perhaps in great danger. So, you know, there we have the armed guard taking out the wage packets. Albert Roberts, his wonderful memoir there. Out in the groups, men, often with wives and families, were living in war conditions. And I recall that 2 men with their families occupied one single artillery dugout at Le Tour Military Cemetery. 2 children were in fact born in the dugout. Rations and water supplies had to be taken regularly to them and to others. So they're living this almost like frontier existence. And obviously there's still a big military footprint in their life. You know, ration packs, water supplies coming out to them. So the men are bringing their wives out, you know, and they're trying to start lives, and they're living in dugouts. Here's the Saint-Omer headquarters. You know, at Saint-Omer, at the headquarters, things are a little bit more stabilised. You can see there's they've taken over all of the old DGRE offices at Saint-Omer, the drawing office, the crucial architecture drawing office. And you know, if you've got big questions about that, do ask and look at Tim Godden's great thesis, which you can download from the Templeman Library. His brilliant work on the junior architects of the commission, because they're the guys who are really going to be doing the hard work. You know, it's those junior architects on the ground who are translating some of the great, you know, ethereal ideas of the architects, the consulting architects in London into you know, proper realized plans on the ground. And so what's it like for them? What is it like for these guys? So here's T.G. Bryson, and you can see that service with the IWGC really is cathartic, occupational therapy. The years spent by the staff of the commission out in France and Belgium following their war experiences were a veritable godsend to most of the fellows, in that it gave them the opportunity to quietly and gradually adapt themselves to civilian life again in their various professional occupations, free of the nerve strain that a direct return to city life might have put upon them. Moreover, after a period of time had elapsed, quite a few of the architectural staff who were bachelors married lady members in other departments of the commission and happily set up their first homes in France. So there we have it. Service with the commission was post-war decompression for many men. Of course, you might also argue that in fact it never does that, you know, because they never escape it and they never want to escape it. You know, it might be, so perhaps it's not a nightmare, but perhaps war is a dream and a bubble which they wrap themselves up in for the rest of their lives. So they never quite take the maneuver to get out of it. You know, they're content with being in this world of the shreds of khaki all around them. It's blooming hard work, though. You know, as I was saying, you've got guys living in dugouts. There's the Adan camp on the Somme, that bitter winter of 1919. It is very, very hard going for those early guys. Here's Margaret Grinham. My husband and I went out with our little daughter Philippa in September 1919. We lived in a Nissen hut in the camp at Adanul, which is near Bethune. If I remember rightly, the married men had Nissen huts and the single men had bunks in the camp buildings. They fed in the big recreation hall. army rations used to come up from Saint-Omer. The first winter was so cold in the Nissen hut, we used to warm the cutlery, etc., handles in hot water as our fingers stuck to the metal. That's hard going. But then also, of course, they're putting down roots in the local community. They're getting to know people. And as she goes on to say, we became friendly with several French families, especially the Coindin. He was the chief of police, the Brevard, who was the mayor, the Brevard family, who was the mayor of Coinchy. We always got on very happily with the French shopkeepers when we got down to Bethune-Camp. There were no shops in Edanguel, I think. And you often find that it's going to be the women who learn a bit of French, who learn a bit of West Flanders Dutch, because of course they're the ones who deal with the shopkeepers. You know, the blokes are out all day in the cemeteries. They're the ones who have to get on with the routines of daily life. So we have, and as I was saying, the need to get on with the experimental cemeteries. So the commission had, in 1917, what had happened is that Sir Herbert Baker and Edwin Lutyens had gone out to France with a fairly large team, really on a fact-finding mission to look at the cemeteries and to start planning ideas. Lutyens very quickly says that it will have to be headstones, partly because of this idea of getting round a multiracial empire. Of course, the other thing that's going through Lutyens' head, if this is a war of every man and you want to tell a story about every man, a cross literally doesn't provide you with enough space. A headstone means you can say something. You can say something about his military identity, his rank, his name. And then once an inscription comes in, you get the perfect counterbalance, don't you? You get the military identity, and then you get the civilian identity at the bottom. Inscriptions have to be paid for. That's not because the commission is, so damn stingy, it's going to screw money out of people. No, it's back to that point about, what we would now call a stakeholder society. For people who were terrified of the idea of the pauper funeral, the idea then of contributing something, making a monetary contribution, inscribing their personality on it is vital to this process. And Ware recognises that and says, great, that's what we do. So then, if in fact you see on most of those headstone sheets on inscriptions, the next of kin are given a little reminder if they don't send the cash, and if they don't send it in, pretty much a blind eye is turned. They get on and do the inscription anyway. They don't stop. Now, to try out the architectural ideas, there are 3 cemeteries. As it says in the record, they're all designed by Blomfield, me, and certainly Tim will tell you this in great detail. That strikes me as highly unlikely given the architectural differences. This looks like the most Blomfieldy of the lot. The one at Le Tréport. You can see one of the immediate problems they ran into. If you're going to build very high walls around the place, it's going to be expensive. This is a country, France and Belgium are countries that are trying to rebuild every farmhouse, every cottage going. Bricklaying is expensive. Bricks are expensive. You do not want to be building very high walls everywhere. So, beautiful cemetery, nice experiment, well done. But the thing they learned from that is high walls, you probably don't want to repeat on a grand scale. Here at Louvaincourt, where you can see that whiteness, and that's what screams out Charles Holden, doesn't it? I won't be prepared to put an awful lot of money that was not designed by Reggie Blomfield, but that's Charles Holden. But I will say that because I'll confess it now, I'm an uncritical admirer of Charles Holden's cemeteries. So you get that amazing sort of spare starkness, particularly as you can see before the horticulture is bedded down there. Here's the one that was thought to be the best, Forceville, in terms of its scale, in terms of the way it mixed a low wall also with hedging, so quite economical, but the hedging gave it a nice horticultural feel. And it really was the Forceville cemetery extension, which they then used as the model. So you've got your headstones, you've got the cross of sacrifice, which is brought in, which is a Blomfield design to give it that Christian stamp. It's got the Crusader's sword stamped into it. Remember, sword is really important here. A sword is put into the casket of the unknown warrior. Remember, he's a warrior and not a soldier. All of the iconography of the chivalric iconography of the Middle Ages is being reasserted here, but with this kind of modernist element to it. It always strikes me, the cemeteries, that they're in their own way, that they're like David Jones's in parenthesis, in stone. There is something going on in the rich iconographies here. And then you can start the processes of transformation. So here, the easiest things to do, in terms of architectural process, to start getting the walls made, the fencing, permanent fencing put up, to bring in the cross, and to bring in that great counterbalancing architectural feature in cemeteries that are big enough of the Lutchins stone of remembrance, or the war stone, a truly amazing monolith, built on the same principles as the cenotaph. It's sort of intarsis. It doesn't have entirely straight sides. You look at them. Lutchins wants them carved out of Portland in one piece. Terrifyingly expensive to do that. They do have to do some compromises. I believe there are even some with concrete cores. They probably didn't tell the great man that, but that sense of elemental architecture that Lutchins was always after. And I think it's really interesting that he was never that happy, never entirely happy, with the inscription that works so well, "Their name liveth forevermore," which Kipling, as the literary advisor, finds in the Apocrypha to the New Testament, and works for every faith of the empire. And it's interesting that he says, somewhere, we need something catchy and something that will go down over the centuries, something like SPQR. Now, I don't think he was, lining himself up with all of the excesses of the Roman Empire, but it's interesting the way his mind was working, that you really wanted something that would have a hook that would work for centuries to come. And here at Coxside, you can see that this slow transformation. The easiest gravestones, headstones to get out are those of unknown soldiers, because you can mass produce those so much more easily than you can the individualized one. So there is, again, that sort of fascinating circularity, isn't it, of the last becoming first in their own way. The unknown soldiers are the ones who get themselves often marked quickest, and you can see this sort of amazing higgledy-piggledy effect. Hookside, right there up on the dunes. The commission is always, the commission gardeners always moaning throughout the 20s and 30s, keeping the grass growing in this cemetery in these conditions, driving us crackers. It always wants to stand up. So this transformation process occurs. Things speed up immensely once they can get the stencils sorted, the badge stencils. So you're not relying on handcraft work anymore. So you can put out contracts to contractors to start mass producing these things, and so the pace really starts to hot up around about 23, 24 to start transforming all of these cemeteries as they can start to get them out there. Here you can see another one in transition, the J.R. Truelove's incredible work at Klein Vierstraat, put down. Lutchins is the principal architect for this cemetery, but J.R. Truelove really does the work. And again, do read Tim's work here, because those junior architects are all of them veterans. So they're given, they've had their careers, their fledgling careers interrupted by the war, and then they're very deliberately given this opportunity by the commission to put down their stamp on the world in this immense civic arts project in its own way, to show the world what they are capable of under the tutelage, when it was at its best, and the wise guidance of the finest architects of the time. And by golly, to those guys take that opportunity. There's another one you can see again where building the wall, getting the cross of sacrifice in, and also getting to work on the horticulture has been a lot easier than getting all of the headstones in place. But you can see how neat and tidy it is. It's just waiting that final manoeuvre. Here at Hedgerow Trench Cemetery, you can see it's almost the reverse. They've got the headstones in now, and the trees have been bedded in, but they're waiting for the rest of the horticultural effect. So there was this fairly extensive transitionary period, in the 20s when you're moving slowly into permanency. Now, if we turn briefly from that, there's another great issue, isn't there, which is what do you do about the missing? Now, to a certain extent, in 1919, the Commission kicks the question of the missing into the long grass. It is so difficult to deal with. It is so intense, and they just want to get on and start a job and start showing the world what they can do and that their solutions are good. So the missing are on the back burner a little bit, but that doesn't mean that they're not being thought about. It's just such a big problem. The first idea is for screen walls. That certain what you might call nosal point cemeteries on the battlefield, certain big cemeteries will be marked out as ones that will have screen walls, rather like the way things like the Ploegsteert Cemetery or Dud Corner and the Luce Memorial were, but there would be lots more of them. That was the original plan. It collapses on the back of the Army's records. It becomes impossible to work out precisely which corner, sometimes even which battlefield, a man had gone missing. Because it might be Private Jones, 3rd Royal Fusiliers, his battalions, say 3rd Ypres in 1917, but then someone says, hang on, we seconded him to that divisional machine gun school, didn't we? When he was actually down on the Somme, and for some reason he went forward one day, and that was it. So no one's quite sure who's been killed or who went missing where. So that then leads to the idea of centralized memorials on the battlefields. Now, the only nation that has records good enough to do the original plan is New Zealand. And New Zealand rigidly sticks by that original plan, which is why all those New Zealand memorials to the missing are in the cemeteries, because they stick with that. It goes slightly wrong for them here. When the Menin Gate is completed, because this, the truly pan-imperial memorial, which the IWGC put up, which represents, every imperial force that fought in the salient, the New Zealand High Commissioner suddenly realizes, oh my life, we're not going to be on this thing, which is why the plaque is added. You might know on that town square side, on the northern pillar, there is the plaque telling you about the New Zealand cemetery. So it brings them into the narrative. Now, these memorials actually serve two functions. There had been a battle exploits memorial committee whose job it was to build memorials, the fortitude and the victories achieved by British armies across the Western Front. It's agreed in 1921 that it be daft to spend out huge sums on two completely separate sets of memorials. So the two are converged into one. So that's why it says what is it, to the honour of the British Army who stood here, and to those of their number who have no known grave. So the memorials have a dual function. They are doing two things. And as I'm sure you all know, rather magically, Lord Plumer says that day, he is not missing, he is here. The missing are finally brought permanently into the realm of commemoration. Down on the Somme, after much huffing and puffing, we get the Thiepval Memorial, slow maturation of that project is absolutely incredible. Lutyens at first wants to see that just outside St Quentin, Saint Quentin, and he wants it to be a bit like the Menin Gate. He sees it similar, a daily thoroughfare. Here is where all memorials, are political landscape. All memorials are making political statements. The French are a lot more touchy than the Belgians about the idea of French people going through a vast British imperial memorial to a major French historic city every day of their lives and thinking that it was the British that won their liberation. So then the idea is, well, move it to the main Somme battlefield itself. Let's put it there. They think about the Albert Bapaume Road. Great, you can straddle the Albert Bapaume Road, perhaps somewhere near Pozières. Same problem. It might be rural France, but we're not going to let people wander through it. All right, then the great symbolic point, the Thiepval Heights, the highest point on the Somme battlefield. Brilliant, everyone says. Brilliant, says the French government. Yeah, great. And why is Thiepval so great? Well, it might dominate the landscape, but as they all know in the 20s and 30s, getting out to the thing is going to be a beggar. It really is a pilgrimage to get out there. It looks like it's always going to be off the beaten track. And by the way, you also have to be a little bit sensitive about the fact that it's a little bit bigger than the Arc de Triomphe. So, this is a fascinating evolution of this memorial, which is undoubtedly the architectural triumph of the Western Front. Nothing comes close to the effect of the Thiepval Memorial. That's not me being dogmatic. I think I'm saying, in fact, there, aren't I? Hugely difficult to construct. As you've probably seen, all of these architects, they might have had their original basis in the arts and crafts movement, but they don't like downpipes, they don't like guttering. You try and build a memorial in the wilderness of the Thiepval Heights in a treeless landscape that's also not going to have proper downpipes on it, and the maintenance issues are going to be immense. And this huge ziggurat pyramid, this treeless landscape, it must have dominated the world even more. We have other ones, don't we? Like down at La Ferté-sous-Jouarre, his goldsmith's memorial. And here is where you can see the way the commission starts to play a little bit of mix and match, between the battles of the war and the memorial designs that it gets in. I just find this kind of bastion that Goldsmith designed remarkable. This sort of ornamental blockhouse that he puts up near the river here. And it seems to say something so much about the later stages of the war. And indeed, for those of you who have studied the iconography on the sarcophagus, you'll notice that it has Lewis guns carved into it. I don't think there were really many of those in the army of 1914s, which it ostensibly commemorates their missing of the first actions. We have the Louverval Memorial, for the Cambrai actions, with those incredible Sergeant Jagger reliefs. And again, that sense, I think Sergeant Jagger is a little bit like seeing David Jones's imperemphasis realised in stone, isn't it? But this incredible range of memorials. Charlton Bradshaw, again, at the Ploegsteert Memorial. And here's another example of war memorials as political landscape. Originally, this memorial or a memorial commemorating these guys from what we might call the southern Somme front and sort of straddling the Franco-Belgian border. Originally, they were thinking perhaps Lille, more likely Armentières, maybe even Bethune, somewhere like that. But again, France getting a bit touchy about the huge number of British memorials going up, whereas the Belgian government, the Flemish, a little bit more laid back about all this. Yeah, you can put it here. So it ends up over the border in Belgium, not where it might originally have been placed. And those fabulous Gilbert Ledwood lions that he designed, the British Empire at peace, you can see British Empire passive, and then the British Empire baring its teeth, the British Empire at war. Now, around this, the Commission is also acting as advisor, as guide, as helper to the other Dominion and colony war memorials. So it's playing a role in the remarkable Newfoundland Park memorial with Rudolf Coccius, the great Dutch landscape architect, and the sculptor Basil Gotto, and obviously that will become the site of Newfoundland's memorial to the missing, whilst also a park with cemeteries in it. There is the South African National Memorial at Delville Wood with Baker, the man deeply connected with South African architecture, the man who had known Rhodes and had such a large architectural practice, is brought in, the ideal man to do this. Incidentally, in that that idea of getting Delville Wood replanted, and in fact that the wood will become a very deliberate part of the memorial scheme. He has an idea for crossbreeding South African springbok with local muntjac deer. So, literally South Africa will be skipping around in this corner of France. I think someone said to him, don't be daft, everyone around there will shoot anything that moves. And so that plan rather falls apart. And I'm sure the local farmer said, with no way we're having more deer, chewing up our crops, eating away at our fence posts. Thanks very much. So that's a bit of the plan that goes. What's fascinating about this memorial, particularly for us, from our perspective, is, I'm sure you've seen, it's Castor and Pollux, it's the twin sons of Jupiter that are holding hands over, in unity, over the spirit of South Africa, this great white horse. Of course, those two figures are representing white South Africa. It's Afrikaners, it's Dutch speakers and English. The black peoples of South Africa, their contribution isn't really there in that memorial at all. It's marked on unveiling day when there are wreaths laid on behalf of things like the South African Native Labour contingent, but this is very much a representation of the imperial hierarchies. And they're the VIPs. It poured with rain that October day, and you can see the wood pushing itself back into life. We have the wonder of Baker's Neuve Chapelle Memorial, unveiled a year earlier, where this tiny corner, or this corner of India, is put down in boggy French Flanders, and the obsessive detailing, of Indian architectural traditions that Baker wanted to get in there. The Bengal tigers that are magnificent, that the crown of India, they make sure they top that with a star of India rather than a cross, because you've got to be sensitive. But fascinatingly, again, in this sensitivity to what the British believe Indian culture is about, they never think to themselves, should we ask an Indian architect about this? No, we'll get Sir Herbert to study it, and he can make up the plan. And there it is on unveiling day, and with the willows growing. It was crucial to have willows as part of the horticultural plan. They'll do well in this boggy climate. Also, that symbol, of India in it. The Canadian, the Commission helps the Canadians. It's all part of the overall grand scheme. So that will again get its function as a memorial to the missing. And as I'm sure you all know, the only really great formal function that's carried out by Edward VIII, the unveiling of that memorial. And then the final one, where Lutchins is just sort of remarkable, really, in his creativity, particularly those pavilions for the Villa Bretonneux Memorial. So that really brings the great project, the building project in France and Belgium, to a close. Now I'll shut up just in a sec, because I realise I've been nagging on for ages. Let's just sort of wrap this up, really, shall we, with the men and women who ensured that this job was done, the dynasties they founded. As I said earlier, many of them are going to bring wives out from Britain, or they are going to marry local women, and start whole new hyphenated generations of Anglo-French and Anglo-Belgian kids here. And these guys, being veterans, are obviously the ideal interface between the bereaved, other veterans coming out to visit. You know, they can contextualize all this. They can bring such a wealth of knowledge and understanding and sympathy. And that's something that H.A. Taylor picked up in his lovely book, Goodbye to the Battlefields. Talking to an official of the commission is like chatting to an enthusiastic landscape gardener with the real gardener's gentleness and love of beauty. There is a note of pride in this, his description of the schemes, architectural and horticultural, employed in the cemeteries. You know, and there, the beauty of the British war cemeteries is probably the dominant memory of every visitor to the old battlefield. No praise can be too high for the skill of the designers and the work of the gardeners. Truly, there is a heartbeat in the work of the Imperial War Graves Commission that you learn in the very first cemetery you visit, and that's there, you know, because of those staff. It strikes me who bring people, you know, into the embrace of what the commission has done, and you know, truly remarkable collection they must have been. And here there's Charlotte and Priestley Dunn, you know, the children of W.A.J. Dunn. You can see his grave in Ypres Town Cemetery in the commission plot there, living with their Belgian grandparents, and you know, obviously because of that, being brought up to speak Dutch, which is why, and this links back to the Ypres talk, which is why eventually a school is built in Ypres for those children, you know, to stamp onto them, really in some ways to stamp out the hyphen. You know, you are not Anglo-French or Anglo-Belgian, you are British, and you're going to get this by being at a school that's right next to St George's Memorial Church and going to the Eton Memorial School. And it's built in Ypres because that's the greatest concentration of cemeteries up there. It's the greatest concentration of staff, so it makes sense. Where, again, we can see the sensitivities between Belgium and France. They do open very briefly a school at Arras, but it's never a great success. So here we go, the ambassador replying in English. We want our schools to be governed by a French governess. We will never admit anything governed by a foreigner here. I myself feel very strongly on this question because we teach our people to be French. If these people do not wish their children to be French, they must take them away. Very good, here, quite right. So you know, the Arras school is never a great success, partly you know, because of these sensitivities about the language, about curriculum, whereas again, it's all a bit more compliant and easygoing in West Flanders, and they can lead a British curriculum up there. And then just to wrap up, and who are the visitors? Well, they are the great and the good. So even the boss, there's Fabian Ware getting his war souvenirs. So even they like collecting souvenirs, and didn't see a big problem with that. But obviously the work really is for these people, the widows, the heartbroken wives and mothers and fathers and brothers who come out from the earliest stages to see these cemeteries. There's one of the St Barnabas hostel pilgrims. And then the commission, you know, once it's done its work, gives them this, you know, the completed thing, the silent cities, as they're known, to create in France and Belgium an empire of the dead. Thank you all very much for listening. I'll shut up there.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That was riveting. I was trying to deal with the questions coming in, but focus on what you were saying as well. Could I ask everyone to show their appreciation in the normal way by pressing the button at the bottom that says raise your hands, please? Thank you very much. Right, we're going to take questions. We've already got loads of questions coming in. If you want to ask more, please do use the Q&A button at the bottom. I can tell you now we're not going to get through them all. So the first person that I'm going to be going to, just bear with me a moment, is Gary Stevenson.
Oh, hiya, Mark. Hiya, Simon. Thank you very much. Wow, I was absolutely stunned by that. It's fascinating.
Oh, it's of interest.
It's something that I didn't know much about. So my question is to you, did negotiations ever take place with German authorities? And if they did, are you able to give it any feel for the dynamics that were operating at that time?
Yeah, well, the Treaty of Versailles, you know, one of its very clear clauses is that the Germans should have war cemeteries. It's then sort of made quite clear that they can't be ostentatious, but they should be decent and they should be honourable and respectable. And France and Belgium, have to collaborate in that. It tends to be largely ignored on the ground, partly, of course, because very quickly what becomes the new Weimar Republic have bigger fish to fry closer to home. Just keeping order in Germany is more important than that. But there is an agreement for German war graves. It's in many ways during the course of the war, the Germans create far bigger, far more impressive cemeteries than the British and French. They really are, and that's part of a propaganda maneuver. This is the natural element. This is the natural frontier of the Reich. And we are here to stay, and how dead show that. So if you see photographs of German war cemeteries during the war, you will see beautiful plantings. You will often see in that German 19th century tradition that had come about of moving large stones, like monoliths. I think even in 1918, when everything's going wrong, they're busy moving some enormous stone from Lüneburg Heath to some cemetery in Belgium. To put up. So at the end of the war, these are really impressive things because they pretty rapidly fall into a state of disrepair. Then the Belgian and French governments insist upon concentration, which mucks things up, and no one is really doing that, shall we say, with any great joy or pride in the job, which beggars things up further. There is then there is a separate Anglo-German graves agreement. The British have been busy exhuming British soldiers that have been buried in German cemeteries behind the lines, and they're bringing them into British cemeteries. And it's then agreed that the Germans can exhume, if German families or the German government, if it so wishes, can exhume from British cemeteries. But if not, they can remain there. And then there is about a 3-4 year period where they're busy discussing German headstone designs until they come up with one which the commission's happy with, which is that square topped one. They allow the Germanic lettering, that very distinctive German calligraphic script goes on it. And then an agreement is put in place whereby the German government helps to pay maintenance for those graves. But the commission, obviously the commission gardeners will treat them in exactly the same way as the other headstones. So you end up in that ironic situation that German soldiers are often better commemorated, if they've been buried by the British and left in an IWGC cemetery, than they might be, had they been in a German cemetery at the end of the war, where Lord alone knows might happen when they have the concentrations. Does that help explain things?
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks, Gary. Mark, could you stop sharing your screen, please?
Right, yes.
Yeah, please. Thank you very much. Okay, next up is David Pitcher. Would you like to unmute?
Okay, first of all, I think I'd like to give a huge thanks to all those unknown soldiers who did all the digging up and recovering all those men so we can go and visit them. Otherwise, we'd have nowhere to go, and it must have been the most heavenly, awful routine to do. My question, Mark, was who was responsible? Were the men doing all that work of trying to trace out from all those records? Was it a very big department, and where did they come from? Were they soldiers or military men?
Yeah, what you have, and this is the great omission really of my talk. There is in what would have been known, in 1919 parlance, a huge army of lady clerks back in Britain. Many of them, working with file indexes. The fact that they're doing this in a pre-computerized world, and they're checking off. So all of the final verifications are being done back in London. The information is coming out, on a daily basis from France and Belgium, and then eventually across the world as well. And then it's all being verified by an army, a pretty small army of clerks, many of them women who are doing work. And then the next of kin verification goes out, and that's where you check all of the details. That's where you can write on what inscription you might like. That gets sent back to the commission, and then they can start the next process, which is to confirm the cemetery register. That takes a fair bit of cross-checking as well. And it's at that point where we really see, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen, but often the fewest number of inscriptions we have are on 1917 and 1918 conscripts. And that's largely because what's happening by that stage, as we know, is the conscription acts are digging deeper and deeper into the back streets of Britain's, slum conurbations to comb men out. And so many of those families, are living that late 19th century quasi-peripatetic life. They fall behind on the rent in their streets. They get chucked out by the landlord. You move 3 streets away with a few little possessions that you've got on a cart. So when in 1920 the verification form comes out to the last known address, they say, oh, the Smiths haven't lived here for about 3 years. We've not seen them. And of course that means then what the commission rests upon is its own internal records, what it's got from the army, and that will become the final verification. And that sort of explains, I think, why you will see there's often a more personalised touch to graves, shall we say, between the 14 and late 16 ones, where you've got the great middle class army of volunteers that are there, and the more highly literate families that are putting their stake on the grave. But there is a remarkable verification process, and you should see. I mean, the files about checking the names on the men in gate. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And then you have those weird anomalies, don't you? As I'm sure you all know, it's the Battle of Langemarck is the dividing point. So after the Battle of Langemarck, you're on at Copse. If you're before the Battle of Langemarck, you're on the men in gate. And then in that glorious element of sort of Ealing comedy Britain, unless you're in the London regiment, in which case all of you are on the men in gate. So I think what makes the story of the commission fascinating is on the surface, we sort of believe that there is one set of absolute hard and fast rules. But of course, once you start to explore it, there is no way a war that has created such a bureaucratic mess as this, it's been so messy, can be always summed up in perfect rules. And they do, if there is a genius of being British, it's expressed there in the sheer pragmatic way they respond to each problem and deal with it, and create fitting solutions. So that was a very long-winded response, David. Did I get to the heart of your question?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, David. Next one up is Malcolm. Malcolm Sperring-Toy, if you'd like to unmute. And
yes, Mark, that was an absolutely fascinating talk, and thank you so much for that. And I've always considered the Imperial / British war graves, or Commonwealth, I should say, are the best kept and most attractive in the world. I've always wondered 2 things. I read somewhere, it may have been in the excellent work by Gibson and Kingsley Ward on Their Courage Remembered, that it was the wife of Fabian Ware who originally suggested that the gardens of the cemeteries should resemble a British garden. Question 1. The other one was, I've noticed on several cemeteries, and particularly the Devonshire at Mametz, that the actual cross of sacrifice, the bronze sword, does not face the graves. Is there any criteria for the positioning of the cross of sacrifice?
It's normally entirely up to the architect, what they think, how they think the aspect of the cemetery should look. And this is coming back to that point about having veterans as architects. Their sense of the way the cemetery should sit in the landscape, of the message that it should send out, and the way it should draw people towards it. So it's very much in the hands of the individual architect as to the way things will look spatially in cemeteries. They're often making very deliberate decisions about the way you're drawn through the cemetery, the way things are placed, particularly for the larger cemeteries where you'll have the stone of remembrance and the cross of sacrifice. And the way the plots are drawn out. I mean, I think perhaps the best example of that is what von Berg does with the cross of sacrifice at Bedford House Cemetery. The way that when you come up to that cross of sacrifice and the way you're oriented out into the more expansive part of the cemetery is a real work, of architectural geometric genius there. So it all is dependent upon their interpretation. As for Fabian Ware's wife, I've no doubt she did say something like that because she was a woman of her class and her background. But what we have to remember is Lutyens is best mates with Gertrude Jekyll. So the idea of horticulture, and through his arts and crafts training is vital. To Baker, to all of them, Blomfield, who's written his book about the genius of the English garden, all of them have got a sense in which horticultural effect goes absolutely hand in glove with architectural effect. So I say I've no doubt that Mrs. Ware mentioned it, but I don't think she's forcing open the door. And I think she's one voice amongst many that are all saying that horticulture is crucial here. Not least, of course, you've got Hill, who's been saying this from Kew, who's been saying this throughout the war and is busy doing all his experiments trying to get variants of empire plants that can survive the northwestern European climate. Now, I think there was someone like from Alor Star or something, down in Malaya, and he's gutted that he can't get that to survive the French winter. And I think there's a West Indian hibiscus that he really wants to use. He said, no, we can't get these to live. We'll plant them in some of the Mediterranean cemeteries. So there's some really fascinating things going on with the horticulture.
Thank you very much indeed, Malcolm and Mark. Okay, next, Christopher Weeks, if you'd like to unmute, please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much indeed, Mark.
Oh,
wonderful talk about a really, truly wonderful organisation. My question is one I'm sure a lot of us have in mind, is how was the decision taken as to which of the small battlefield cemeteries were to be consolidated?
That's largely to do with logistics of accessibility. And remember that they're looking at a landscape where bits of it, they can't work out whether it's ever going to be reclaimed, whether you're ever going to easily be able to get there. There are lots of discussions about the Zone Rouge across Belgium and France, that it should be forested. And if the worst zones are forested, what's going to happen to some of these tiny cemeteries? Is it, even if they leave them there, will anyone ever penetrate these forests to visit them? What's it going to do for maintenance? So they're making a lot of decisions on the ground about accessibility, sometimes in a bit of a hurry and kind of based on rumour, what's happening, in the local mairie, what they're hearing about the Office for the Devastated Regions and where it might go. Yeah, they're reacting a lot of times to local intelligence, and they're thinking about sheer accessibility because they're carrying, this incredible burden of in perpetuity. They're straight away thinking about that, but often they're sort of trapped by what are, in fact, relatively short-term, problems are facing them. So yeah, so hence the obsession often that concentration cemetery should be near main roads or where new roads are being planned. With the Serre Road, which is going to be widened, that's agreed by the French, by what becomes Region Picardy. So that's crucial for a concentration cemetery. So yeah, lots of little decisions which are often being made in consultation, or at least, shall we say, on kind of rumours that are coming out from local French and Belgian officials about that.
Yeah, many thanks.
Thanks, Christopher. Thank you, Mark. Next one up is Becca, who doesn't have a video, but if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. That was an excellent talk. I was wondering what happened during World War II. Were any of these cemeteries and memorials damaged? And if so, what were the efforts to restore it at the end of the war?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point, Becca. Thank you for that one. It's very eccentric in some ways what happens in the Second World War. It's commonly agreed between the combatants that there should be no, at least the Western combatants, that there should be no overt, large-scale desecration of memorials, which generally happens. What then the Nazi forces do, though, in the vast majority of instances, the occupation forces are just leaving the cemeteries and memorials as part of the background, the wallpaper of their landscape. So, obviously the maintenance work has stopped. In a few instances, there are a couple of, commission workers who miraculously managed to avoid being interned, partly some of them, playing their Irish Free State card, being neutral, they should be allowed to carry on. But in many instances, what's happening is local people are doing what they can to try and keep them in check, to stop them becoming overgrown. But in other places, that's really all that's happening. Is that the horticulture is getting out of hand. They're not being properly maintained, but there is no systematic damage done. Where we see the exceptions is, and occasionally this is where you're seeing sort of Nazi ideology and its sensitivities at work. Once the commando raids start, and of course that winds everybody up in Berlin. Well, quelle surprise, what goes first? What you might call the memorial to the prototype commando mission, the Brugge Memorial. Boom, that one goes. What is it? Is it the Australian 2nd Division Memorial at Mont Saint Quentin? The amazing one of the digger driving his bayoneted rifle through the body of the German Imperial Eagle. They don't like that one. That goes. The French Gas Memorial at Steenstraat, which talks about, what is it, to the victims of inhumanity. They dynamite that one. They're very clearly going to get rid of that. So there are a few memorials that get, very deliberately taken out. But relatively few others are damaged in any way. There is some vandalism done to Langton Cemetery at the coast at Boulogne, because the Germans do put in a mortar school next to it, and you can see that none of the guys there seem that bothered if stray mortar rounds go into the cemetery. But even there's sort of almost an element of like malicious lads larking around rather than a wholesale policy towards destruction. One of the great ironies is one of the memorials that has most damage done to it is the Menin Gate, and that's almost entirely caused by the British. In 1940, the Royal Engineers blow the causeway to the Menin Gate to slow down the Germans, and then in a typical Baldric-esque cunning plan, do not blow any of the other causeways around Ypres. I think that has the Germans scratching their heads a little bit. That causes an enormous amount of shrapnel and smoke damage to the memorial, but relatively easy to sort out. After the war, it's then agreed that the damage to the memorials, some of it should be left, because it makes them like ancient warriors themselves. They become almost Coriolanus-like, bearing their scars for future generations, which is why from that 1944 sharp engagement at Neuve-Chapelle, the Neuve-Chapelle India Memorial has got some shrapnel damage to it. It's an honourable scar of war. And to sort of wrap up this very long-winded response, see, you've learned a lesson now, never ask me a question. The Germans, the Nazis, actually end up causing far more damage to their own cemeteries because they're fulfilling, their ideological warfare against the Jewish community, which is to wipe out Jewish graves. So they actually cause far more vandalism, wiping out the idea that there were ever Jewish men that fought and died for the Kaiser and for Germany. And it takes until the 1950s for those to be restored. So yeah, the weirdest thing is the places where they cause most systematic damage are actually in their own cemeteries, which is very odd. But all makes perfect sense, if you understand, the mad position they're coming from.
Okay,
thank you very much. That was really informative.
Thanks, Becca. Thanks, Mark. Okay, next up is Stephen Mason, if you'd like to unmute.
Hi, Mark. Another fascinating talk. Very many thanks for that.
Thank you.
My question goes back to the GRU days. My great-great-uncle was killed at Mons And he's buried in a German cemetery with his stone actually says buried near his spot. Can you say something about the recording of the casualties in the German cemeteries, how that was communicated to the GRU teams?
Yes, that all comes via the International Red Cross. There is constant exchange of information about the dead and those who've been formally recorded with graves. So yeah, that all goes via Switzerland essentially and filters its way through. And that's because also for the Red Cross, obviously it goes hand in glove with the flip side of their operation, which is to try and work out who's been taken prisoner. Because a lot of the time, you've got obviously a next of kin back home, very, very worried. Some of them, still working on the idea that maybe their loved one has been captured, maybe they're in a prison camp. So the Red Cross is the one trying to stitch all these bits of information together. And seeing as the GRU, and the British Red Cross work very closely with each other, that's where the verification goes on.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased now to welcome Rogério from Brazil. I know you've been with us on a few of these webinars, so good to see you, Rogério. If you'd like to unmute and ask Mark your question.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to participate in this meeting. I'm a Western Front Association member many years ago. And I would like to know, Mr. Mark, about the debates between the defenders of the construction of the memorials and those who defended better pensions and salaries, I don't know how to spell, to the survival soldiers of the Great War. Because we know that the construction, the building of these memorials was very expensive. And at the same time, the soldiers that survived the war and their widows, they were receiving bad salaries and bad pensions at the same time. What do you think about this?
Yeah, obviously, among certain ex-service movements, at the end of the war, there are various movements, there are various organisations representing the veterans. And it's only really in 1921 that they're all going to converge and become the British Legion, later the Royal British Legion. What's interesting about all of those early organisations is that they put a lot of pressure on the British government for three things, really. First of all, as you might expect, decent, proper war pensions, and proper treatment for veterans, and proper treatment for the dependents of dead soldiers, so widows and children have to be looked after. The next thing is, and they're totally in agreement here, the dead have to be marked properly, so they're totally in agreement with the then IWGC plans, and they give it their blessings, as does the Labour Party. And there are a lot of trade union delegations and Labour Party representation goes out. Harry Gosling, who's a great member of the trade union, the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, he is very deliberately asked to be a commissioner, so you get the voice of organised labour as part of it. But also those organisations say that the government should pay for poor people to visit these cemeteries and memorials. That's one of the first things that goes out of the window, really, because there's no way, that anyone's government is going to cough up all of that expense. Instead, what the Treasury does in 1923 is to give a one-off grant to the various charities, and it says you use this to subsidise visits. So the Salvation Army, the YMCA, they get a big chunk of cash from the Treasury to do this. What then happens in the 20s, as, shall we say, it's more really politically left-leaning veterans who are disillusioned with what they think is the social conservatism with the small c of the British Legion. They will increasingly say on things like Armistice Day, you build memorials to the dead in Britain, and across the world, because that's the cheap and easy solution. looking after the living is something you do not want to do. So they tend to make that complaint. But of course, it's always very hard to get the moral high ground here. You know, it's very hard to dominate the public discussion, because what you end up being faced with are heartbroken widows who say, but I've visited my husband's grave, and it's beautiful and it made me feel better. I could take my children to see it. So that rhetoric that tends to come out of the most left-wing veterans movements that do complain about the amount of money being spent on this, it tends to crash and burn really quite quickly, because it's so easy to put the counter argument that in fact compared with the amount of money that you would have to spend on other elements of veteran welfare, what you're spending on the commission and the maintenance of these things is actually pretty cost effective and pretty cheap, and it sort of comes back. I remember one of the very first visits I ever made to the Western Front as a young teenager, actually with one of Martin Middlebrook's tours, and it was a Second World War veteran, and he tapped me on the back and he said to me, son, when I'm standing here in these cemeteries, I say it's the only bloody thing my taxes go on, and I don't moan or worry about it. The sense of let them spend on this, that's fine.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Rogerio.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to have to wind it up with just one more, I'm afraid. Just to give you the context, we've got about 27 questions that haven't been dealt with, so we'll be here till midnight if but we are going to wrap it up. And the last one is from Gordon Bell. Gordon, if you'd like to unmute and ask Mark.
Yes.
Good evening. I enjoyed it very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
My question is, what were the problems of identifying the dead, which were left many unburied in Gallipoli in 1919?
Oh, yeah, I mean, Gallipoli is just an incredible problem for them, really. There are, in many instances, the desecration that had been feared during the war, were all these fears that people of a different faith, just would never respect any kind of Christian burial. None of that occurs, really. There's a tiny bit of disturbance of some graves, more often done by wild animals, actually, scrabbling around than anything else. But when they can finally get there, because remember, of course, Turkey will not sign the original treaty, or it does sign and then it all collapses and there are further arguments, and it takes until 1923 and a revised treaty at Lausanne, and that's really when the thaw begins and they can start work on a bigger scale. Yeah, so they find that Gallipoli is a nightmare when it comes to identifying graves, which is why often the solution in the cemeteries is not to mark individual graves, but they will show you in the cemetery design where there was a row of graves. They're often, what they call the flat headstone marker, which was adopted for some of the places in the Eastern Mediterranean. So you get the sense that once upon a time they knew there was a row of graves here, but because of the climatic extremes of Turkey, and the Gallipoli Peninsula, because of what had happened, they really can't identify. So they give you a hint at a symbolic, grave of what was once a real grave. But it's why the missing figures, statistically and proportionately are so huge, and so many men, have to go on that big Hellespont memorial, which Sir John Burnett designs, and you can see there, that the commission and the battle exploits, the National Battle Monuments Commission, really trying to square the circle. You've got a lot of missing men. You've got to give them equal status. So, what do they decide to do? A memorial on a massively high point, and knowing that this is a maritime, nodal point of the world, a crossroads between East and West. Every ship that comes past here will see this. Everyone will know that we have a major memorial here. So the Gallipoli, the Hellespont memorial to the missing, really is very, very carefully thought through to try and make up for that problem of just how many unidentified graves they've got. You know, it really is a they're on a hiding to nothing there, really, because of the length of time it takes to get back involved, and the extremities of climate there on the Gallipoli Peninsula.
Great. Thanks for your question, Gordon, and thanks for that, Mark. Mark, amazing talk. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Could I ask everyone again just to raise your hands as a show of appreciation, please?
Wow.
Okay, so that's it for tonight. We have got some more webinars coming up at the Western Front Association on Wednesday of this week, not Thursday as normal, but on Wednesday of this week, we've got the co-patron, Sir Hugh Strawn, who will be doing a talk entitled From Limited War to Total War. And then next Monday, at the usual time of 8 o'clock, we've got Gary Sheffield back again, and this time talking about gas warfare in the First World War. So I hope you can join us for one or both of those. As I say, we've got many more coming up in November. Once again, my thanks to you, Mark. I'll drop you a quick email tomorrow just to tie up loose ends. But thanks for another great talk, and say good night to you and good night to everyone. Thanks for joining us.
I'll just quickly add, you said we had other questions. You know, as before, my email address is m.l.connelly, which is CONNELLY @kent.ac.uk. You know, if people want to send any questions, queries my way, very happy to answer them. So do feel free to do that. And thanks so much, Simon, for the invite. Thank you all. It's always brilliant talking to the WFA because of, you know, the sheer amount of knowledge that's out there. It's a real honour to address such an amazing group of enthusiastic and hugely knowledgeable people. So thank you so much for the invite.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Mark. Good night, everyone. Good night, Mark. Thank you.
Mademoiselle from Armentières.